The Galactic Navigation Academy stood as a monumental structure of gleaming obsidian and floating energy platforms, suspended high above the surface of Kelor 7. It was a place where only the brightest minds from across the known universe gathered to master the complexities of interstellar travel. Inside, its halls were lined with holographic charts displaying shifting star systems, pulsating nebulae, and swirling gravity wells. Students of various species roamed the corridors, their gazes often locked onto floating data screens filled with complex equations. Among them was Jerry Murphy, a human who had arrived at the Academy just 6 months ago. He was an anomaly here, one of only a handful of humans ever admitted. The Academy prided itself on selecting only those with the highest aptitude for astronavigation, a field that had long been dominated by civilizations that had charted the stars long before humanity even developed interstellar travel. To most of his classmates, Jerry was something of a curiosity, an underdog in an institution where he was expected to fail. The final exam was infamous. It was designed to push students beyond their limits, challenging them to calculate a safe passage through the Serpentine Veil, a deadly cluster of unstable stars and black holes. The exam was more than a test of knowledge, it was a rite of passage. Even the most brilliant alien students struggled to complete the task within a week, relying on advanced AI assistance and years of training in hyperspatial physics. Jerry sat at his assigned station in the vast exam chamber, where the air hummed with the low vibrations of quantum processors processing trillions of calculations per second. His classmates were already deep in concentration, their neural interfaces linked to massive computational systems. To them, this was the only way to navigate the stars. Through cold, calculated logic refined by algorithms beyond human comprehension. Varka, a reptilian student with iridescent scales that shimmered under the artificial light, glanced at Jerry with a smirk. "You should drop out now, human. This is no place for guesswork." His voice carried a sharp, guttural tone, filled with amusement rather than malice. Jerry ignored him. He had no interest in proving himself to creatures who already assumed his failure. He exhaled slowly, glancing up at the massive holographic projection above them. A dynamic, shifting model of the Serpentine Veil, where gravitational forces twisted and bent space into unpredictable patterns. The AI-generated paths flickered across the display, showing the safest routes predicted by the most advanced simulations. The students would have to refine those projections, calculating every potential anomaly that could disrupt their passage. A single miscalculation could mean destruction for any ship attempting the journey in real life. The exam began. Most of the students immediately engaged with their neural interfaces, their minds diving into the intricate mathematical frameworks required to process the navigation data. Holograms of data matrices surrounded them, and the faint hum of synchronized computational activity filled the room. Jerry, however, leaned back in his chair. He let his eyes scan the projection of the Serpentine Veil, but unlike the others, he didn't see it as a problem of equations and calculations. He saw patterns, shapes, a natural flow in the chaos. As a child, he had spent countless nights lying on his back staring up at Earth's night sky. His grandfather, an old sailor, had taught him about celestial navigation, the way ancient humans had charted the oceans long before they had advanced instruments. Jerry had memorized constellations not as arbitrary arrangements of stars, but as guides that told a story, each formation marking a path that led somewhere. Now, as he studied the Serpentine Veil, he felt that same instinct stirring within him. He wasn't looking for a formula. He was looking for a path. Minutes passed. Around him, the other students continued their intense calculations, the glow of their neural interfaces illuminating their faces in pale, otherworldly light. Their holographic projections shifted as they refined their models, rerunning simulations again and again. Jerry tilted his head slightly. He followed the natural gravitational currents within the projection, tracing an invisible route in his mind. Most of the students were trying to force a path through the cluster by mitigating dangers, adjusting trajectories to counteract the unstable gravitational shifts. But Jerry saw something different. He saw a way to use those gravitational shifts. Instead of fighting against them, his fingers moved across the console, inputting coordinates. He wasn't running simulations, he was setting a course. A few heads turned as his display remained almost empty. No active computational processes, no simulations, just a single, unbroken trajectory through the veil. Varka let out a dry chuckle. What is he doing? Sleeping? One of the other students, a pale-skinned creature with translucent tendrils instead of hair, narrowed his eyes at Jerry's screen. No, he's just inputting a direct course. The laughter among the students grew. He's just guessing, someone muttered. Jerry didn't respond. He knew they wouldn't understand. He double-checked the trajectory one last time, then pressed the submit button. A notification chimed. Exam completed. The professor, an elder being with 3 luminous eyes that glowed with an ever-shifting light, stopped mid-stride. His gaze turned toward Jerry's terminal. What? The murmurs in the exam hall grew louder. Some students stared in shock, others in open amusement. No one had ever completed this exam in less than 30 minutes. It wasn't possible. The professor moved toward Jerry's screen, his long, bony fingers hovering over the data display. With a wave of his hand, he pulled up the student's submitted route. Then he froze. The murmuring died down as the professor's glowing eyes widened slightly. He tapped the projection, activating the simulation. The path that Jerry had entered unfolded before the class, weaving effortlessly through the gravitational anomalies, using the natural distortions instead of avoiding them. The simulation completed, perfect route detected, travel time reduced by 37%, margin of error 0.0003%, silence. A reptilian student's tail twitched nervously. A few students fidgeted in their seats. No one had ever created such an optimized path before, not even the highest-ranking scholars of the academy. The professor finally turned toward Jerry, his expression unreadable. "How did you do this?" he asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and something else, something almost resembling concern. Jerry met his gaze and simply shrugged. "I just looked at the stars." The room remained silent long after the simulation ended. The other students exchanged uncertain glances, some whispering in hushed tones, while others simply stared at the holographic display. The professor, still standing beside Jerry's terminal, made no move to dismiss the exam or acknowledge what had just happened. His 3 luminous eyes remained locked on the trajectory Jerry had submitted, as if searching for an error, an imperfection, something that would explain how a human had just outperformed centuries of computational advancements. Jerry remained seated, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the console. He wasn't sure what reaction he had expected, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut through. He had never cared much about impressing anyone here. He had submitted his answer because he saw the solution clearly, not because he wanted recognition. But now, with every set of alien eyes fixated on him, he started to realize just how deeply his actions had unsettled the academy. The professor finally broke the silence. "Murphy, come with me." Jerry stood without hesitation, ignoring the lingering stares as he followed the professor out of the examination chamber. The moment they stepped into the corridor, the heavy doors slid shut behind them, sealing the rest of the students inside. The professor walked with long, deliberate strides, his robes barely making a sound against the polished floor. Jerry remained a step behind him, unsure of where they were going, but sensing that this conversation would be far from routine. They moved through the academy's grand hallways, past towering glass windows that revealed the swirling purple skies of Kelor's 7. Jerry could see distant starships entering and exiting the planet's atmosphere, their sleek bodies cutting through the clouds like arrows. The academy was a hub for interstellar travel, a place where the best minds in the galaxy were trained to push the limits of known navigation. And yet, with a single test, he had just rewritten what those minds thought was possible. The professor led him into a dimly lit chamber, smaller than the main lecture halls, but lined with intricate star charts and celestial maps. A large circular table stood at the center, displaying a holographic projection of the Serpentine Veil. The simulation of Jerry's route was still running, playing in a loop as if it were being studied over and over again. The professor finally turned to face him. "How long have you been at this academy?" Jerry folded his arms. 6 months. The professor's glowing eyes flickered slightly. "And before that, Earth." A pause. The room's ambient lights pulsed softly, casting shifting shadows across the professor's angular features. "Your species does not possess the same level of technological expertise in interstellar navigation as the civilizations represented here. Yet you solved a problem in 30 minutes that has taken others years to master." He gestured toward the projection. "Explain." Jerry exhaled, his gaze shifting to the swirling gravitational currents displayed before him. "I didn't use calculations. I just saw the path." The professor tilted his head slightly, observing him. "You are saying you navigated a field of unpredictable stellar anomalies without computational assistance, simply by observing patterns?" Jerry gave a slight nod. "Humans have been navigating this way for thousands of years. Before we had computers, before we had even left our own planet, sailors used the stars to find their way. I just did the same thing." The professor's expression didn't change, but the room's energy seemed to shift. A quiet intensity settled between them. "You claim this was instinct. I wouldn't call it that, more like recognition. The currents in that simulation, they reminded me of how ocean tides move. You don't fight against them. You move with them." The professor's fingers tapped against the edge of the table, a rhythmic, thoughtful motion. "This method is not known to us." Jerry wasn't sure if that was meant as a compliment or a challenge. The professor turned toward one of the control panels on the wall, entering a series of commands. A different holographic projection appeared, this time a far more complex field of celestial anomalies. A dense network of overlapping gravitational waves, unstable wormholes, and shifting energy distortions filled the space before them. "This is the Epsilon Drift," the professor said. "A sector so unstable that no ship has ever successfully navigated through it. Every attempt has resulted in catastrophic failure." Jerry studied the projection. The gravitational distortions twisted and shifted like a chaotic storm. Yet beneath the surface chaos, there was an underlying rhythm. He didn't need time to analyze it. He could already see the way through. The professor watched him carefully. "If your method is as effective as you claim, then prove it. Chart a course." Jerry hesitated for only a moment before stepping closer to the table. His fingers moved swiftly over the interface, not running simulations, not testing variables, just inputting a path. The holographic representation of his trajectory began to take shape, a smooth, fluid route that weaved between the gravitational hazards as if it had always been meant to exist. When he finished, the room fell into silence once more. The professor studied the projection with an unreadable expression. After several moments, he turned back toward Jerry. "This cannot be ignored." His voice was quiet but firm. "The Galactic Council must be informed." Jerry frowned. "What does that mean?" The professor's gaze lingered on the navigation path. "It means you may have just changed everything." Jerry stood motionless, his mind processing the professor's words. The Galactic Council. He had read about them in passing. An elite governing body responsible for overseeing the technological and scientific progress of the major civilizations in the known universe. Their influence spanned across entire star systems, dictating policies that shaped interstellar travel, trade, and military strategy. If his work had drawn their attention, it meant that his discovery wasn't just an anomaly. It was a disruption. The professor wasted no time. He entered a command into the room's interface, and within seconds a communication link was established. The air shimmered with the projection of a towering chamber lined with figures of varying species, their forms draped in ceremonial robes. Some had smooth, bioluminescent skin that pulsed with rhythmic light. Others bore metallic exoskeletons, their faces unreadable behind polished visors. At the center stood a figure of immense stature, his elongated features framed by a silver crown that glowed faintly against the dim surroundings. Professor Exaltor, the central figure, spoke, his voice layered with multiple resonant frequencies. "Your request for immediate audience has been granted. State your purpose." The professor inclined his head in a respectful nod before stepping aside, revealing Jerry in full view of the council. The subtle change in the atmosphere was instant. Some of the council members shifted in their seats, their gazes sharpening as they observed the human standing before them. "This student," the professor began, "has demonstrated a method of navigation that defies all known computational models. He has charted a direct course through both the Serpentine Veil and the Epsilon Drift without the use of AI assistance, relying solely on what he refers to as natural pattern recognition." A murmur spread through the council. Jerry could feel the weight of their collective scrutiny pressing against him. Some regarded him with curiosity, others with skepticism, but one expression stood out among them: concern. The central figure raised a hand, silencing the quiet discussions. His gaze fixed on Jerry. "Human, do you claim that your method is superior to the systems we have perfected over millennia?" Jerry hesitated. He hadn't expected to be questioned so directly, but he knew that any hesitation would only weaken his position. "I don't claim anything. I only know that it worked." A different council member, her skin a dark iridescent blue, leaned forward. "Do you understand what it means if your method proves to be repeatable? Every civilization in this chamber has invested centuries into developing artificial navigation intelligence. You are suggesting that a single human mind can outperform our greatest technologies." Jerry met her gaze evenly. "I'm not suggesting anything, but if it's true, then maybe you've all been looking at navigation the wrong way." The silence that followed was thick with tension. The professor remained still beside him, his glowing eyes betraying no hint of emotion. The council exchanged glances, unspoken words passing between them. Finally, the central figure exhaled. "There is only one way to determine the validity of your claims. You will undergo an official trial. The council will assign you a live navigation task, one with real stakes. If you succeed, your method will be studied. If you fail, this matter will be put to rest." The weight of the declaration settled over Jerry, but he refused to let it shake him. "What's the task?" The central figure turned his gaze to the professor. "Zaltor, you will provide the details. We will expect a full report within the next cycle." With that, the projection faded, leaving the room dim and silent once more. The professor turned toward Jerry. "The trial will not be a simulation." Jerry narrowed his eyes. "Then what is it?" "A real mission. You will be placed aboard a deep space vessel traveling toward a system that has never been successfully mapped due to unpredictable gravitational fluctuations. Every AI model has failed to find a safe passage. If you can navigate it manually, then your method will be undeniable." A slow grin pulled at the corner of Jerry's lips. "Finally," he muttered. "A real test." The professor studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You should not underestimate the danger of this assignment. If your calculations are wrong, you will not have the luxury of recalculating. The ship will be lost." Jerry shrugged. "Then I won't be wrong." The professor observed him in silence before finally giving a slow nod. "Prepare yourself. The trial begins in 2 cycles." As Jerry left the chamber, he could feel the shift in the Academy's energy. Whispers followed him through the halls. He had gone from being an oddity to a challenge to the very foundations of interstellar navigation, and now, for the first time, he had the chance to prove that human intuition was more than just an anomaly. It was an advantage. Jerry stood at the edge of the launch platform, staring at the ship that would carry him into the unknown. The Erebus, a sleek obsidian-hulled vessel, hummed with latent energy as its systems prepared for departure. It was unlike anything he had ever flown before, far beyond the human crafts he had trained with on Earth. This was an elite deep space scout, designed for precision, agility, and survivability in extreme environments. He exhaled slowly. This was no simulation. There would be no second chances. Professor Exceltor stood beside him, his 3 glowing eyes fixed on the vessel. Once you leave the dock, you will be entirely on your own. The Council has disabled the ship's AI navigation system. There will be no automated course correction, no predictive modeling. Your mind is the only guide this ship will have. Jerry nodded. He had expected this. The Council didn't just want proof of his method. They wanted to push him to the absolute limits. Zaltor continued, his tone measured. Your mission is to navigate the Erebus through the Lazari expanse, an unmapped sector of space known for its chaotic gravitational fields. Every attempt to chart a course through it has failed. If you make it to the designated exit coordinates without incident, your method will be acknowledged as superior. Jerry smirked. And if I don't? Zaltor's expression remained unreadable. Then the Erebus will be lost, and your theory will be discarded as mere human arrogance. Jerry met his gaze. Good thing I don't plan on failing. Without another word, he strode toward the boarding ramp. The ship's access hatch hissed open, and he stepped inside, feeling the cool artificial air wash over him. The interior was compact and efficient, built for a single pilot. Every surface was sleek metal and illuminated controls, glowing softly in the dim light. The main console curved around the pilot's seat, displaying a full panoramic projection of the surrounding space. He settled into the seat and ran his fingers over the controls. The system recognized his touch, activating the ship's manual interface. A voice chimed through the speakers. AI navigation disabled, manual operation engaged, awaiting pilot input. He grinned. Let's do this. The docking clamps released, and the Erebus drifted forward into open space. Outside, the galactic expanse stretched before him, a vast canvas of distant stars and swirling nebulae. Ahead lay the Lazari expanse, an ominous void where gravity twisted unpredictably, where no AI had ever managed to chart a stable course. Jerry kept his hands steady on the controls, letting the ship drift toward the expanse. He wasn't relying on sensors or calculations. He was looking at the stars, at the patterns they formed, at the way the cosmic tides moved. The moment the Erebus crossed into the expanse, the ship shuddered violently. Warnings flashed across the console. Gravitational instability detected. Hull integrity at risk. Jerry ignored them. He had expected turbulence. The forces at play here weren't random. They only seemed random to those who tried to fight against them. He exhaled slowly, allowing himself to feel the motion of space around him. Most pilots would try to correct their trajectory, compensate for the pull of the shifting gravity wells. He did the opposite. He let the ship fall. The Erebus tilted, caught in the gravitational flow. The alarms blared louder, but Jerry saw what the ship's AI never could. This was a current, not a danger. He adjusted his course slightly, just enough to ride the wave instead of resisting it. The violent shaking subsided. He grinned. That's more like it. The ship surged forward, propelled not by brute force but by the very forces that had trapped every vessel before him. He could feel the tension in the space around him, the pull of the distortions, but instead of fearing them, he saw them for what they were. Pathways. Hours passed in a blur. The Lazari expanse was a labyrinth filled with shifting gravitational fields and unstable energy pockets, but every time the ship neared a potential disaster, Jerry adjusted instinctively. He didn't need an AI to predict the flow. He saw it before it happened. The council was watching. He had no doubt that they had long-range sensors tracking his progress, analyzing every move. They had expected him to fail. Now, they were witnessing something they had never seen before. As the Erebus neared the final stretch, the most dangerous part of the expanse came into view, a massive, shifting anomaly known as the Event Horizon Maw. It was the primary reason no ship had ever successfully navigated this sector. The gravity well at its center constantly shifted, swallowing anything that came too close. Jerry studied it for a moment, his mind racing. There was no way through it, only around. He closed his eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. The gravitational field surrounding the maw moved in pulses, like the tides of an ocean. If he timed it perfectly, he could slip through in the brief window before the pull became inescapable. He gripped the controls tighter. This was it. The ship accelerated. The gravitational forces surged around him, pulling, twisting, but he stayed locked onto his path. The maw's pull increased, trying to drag him into its core, but just as the window opened, Jerry executed a sharp maneuver, slipping into the only safe corridor. The Erebus shot forward. The ship rattled violently, the pressure immense. But then, just as suddenly as it began, the turbulence ceased. Silence. The ship was free. Jerry exhaled, his heart hammering in his chest. The exit coordinates appeared on his display. He had done it. As he approached the rendezvous point, a transmission came through. "Pilot Murphy, this is the Galactic Council. Stand by for immediate debriefing." He smirked, leaning back in his seat. "Take your time, I'm not going anywhere." Jerry sat in the pilot seat of the Erebus, his hands still resting lightly on the controls as the ship drifted in the calm, open space beyond the Lazari expanse. His breathing had slowed, the rush of adrenaline settling now that the mission was over. The weight of what he had just accomplished pressed down on him, not as fear or exhaustion, but as a realization of how much had changed in a single journey. A transmission from the Galactic Council had already come through, but he knew they wouldn't be celebrating his success. The Council hadn't wanted him to prove anything. They had wanted him to fail. His victory meant their entire navigation system, everything built over centuries, was suddenly in question. The display flickered and a new transmission connected. Professor Exaltor's face appeared on the screen, his 3 glowing eyes studying Jerry with a careful, unreadable expression. "You have completed the trial," Zaltor said, his voice calm but firm. "Your survival confirms the effectiveness of your method." Jerry smirked. "I'd say that's an understatement." The professor didn't return the expression. "The council is convening. They wish to discuss the implications of your success." He paused for a fraction of a second before continuing. "I advise you to prepare yourself. This will not be a simple debriefing." Jerry leaned back in his seat. "They didn't think I'd make it, did they?" "No," Zaltor admitted. "Many among the council believed this would be the last time your name was spoken." Jerry chuckled. "Guess I ruined their day." The professor remained silent for a moment, then spoke again. "Return to the academy. The council will be waiting." The transmission cut out, leaving Jerry alone with his thoughts. He stared at the vast emptiness before him, the stars stretching infinitely in every direction. He had just done the impossible, yet something in Zaltor's voice made him uneasy. The real challenge wasn't over. He engaged the ship's manual controls and set a course for the academy. The council chamber was larger than Jerry had expected, the ceiling arched high above, illuminated by an artificial recreation of a galaxy, its spirals spinning slowly in a mesmerizing display. At the center of the room stood a circular platform where he had been instructed to stand. Surrounding him were the council members, seated in elevated rows, their faces shrouded in a mixture of shadow and cold, analytical interest. Zaltor stood among them, though he did not speak, as the central figure of the council, a tall being with skin like polished obsidian, rose to address him. "Human," the council leader began, his voice deep and layered, vibrating through the chamber. "You have done what no AI, no computational model, no scientist in our history has been able to do. You have navigated the Lazari expanse unaided. Explain yourself. Jerry crossed his arms. I already did. I saw the path. I followed it. Murmurs spread through the council members. Some exchanged glances, while others observed him with narrowed eyes. The council leader raised a hand, silencing the whispers. Your method defies logic. It contradicts everything we have developed. Our technology is designed to remove error, to perfect navigation through precise calculations. And yet, you succeeded without any of it. Jerry shrugged. Maybe you've been too focused on numbers. Space isn't something you calculate. It's something you understand. One of the council members, an older being with a translucent skull revealing an active neural system beneath, leaned forward. If what you claim is true, then humans possess an ability no other species has demonstrated. This changes everything. Jerry exhaled. He could feel the weight of their words. They weren't just talking about navigation anymore. They were talking about what this meant for the balance of power across the galaxy. If humans could traverse the most dangerous regions of space without advanced AI, without reliance on technology, then they held an advantage no other species had. Exaltor finally spoke. There are those within the council who believe your discovery should be buried, that your method should not be shared. Jerry narrowed his eyes. You mean suppressed? The older council member spoke again. Do you not understand what this means? If humans alone possess this ability, then your species becomes a threat. If every fleet in the galaxy depends on computational models, while humans can go anywhere unaided, what do you think will happen? Jerry clenched his jaw. I didn't come here to start a war. No, the council leader said, but knowledge has a way of shifting power. You have forced us to reconsider everything we believed about interstellar travel. The council must decide what to do with this knowledge. Jerry's pulse quickened. He could see where this was going. If they saw him as a threat, they wouldn't just silence his discovery. They would silence him. Zaltor stepped forward. There is another way. The chamber grew still. The council leader turned his attention to Zaltor. Speak. The professor met Jerry's gaze before addressing the council. We do not suppress knowledge. We evolve with it. If humans possess this ability, then it must be studied, integrated. We do not cast it aside. We learn from it. Silence followed. Then, slowly, the council leader inclined his head. And if the human refuses? Zaltor did not look away. Then you will never be able to replicate what he has done. And you will always be at a disadvantage. The tension in the room was palpable. Jerry could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. If he agreed, he would become more than a student. He would become an experiment. If he refused, the council might decide that allowing him to leave with this knowledge was too great a risk. Finally, he took a breath. I'll teach you. The council members murmured again, some surprised, some skeptical. But on one condition, Jerry continued. You don't treat this like a science project. You don't try to force it into equations or algorithms. You learn it the way I learned it, by seeing. The council leader studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. Agreed. The tension in the chamber eased, though Jerry knew this was only the beginning. He had just rewritten the rules of navigation, and in doing so had altered the course of galactic history. As he stepped down from the platform, Exaltor walked beside him. You just changed everything, the professor said quietly. Jerry smirked. Good. It was about time. And with that, he left the chamber, knowing that the stars were no longer just a frontier to be mapped. They were a language waiting to be understood.